London, 1875. The servants' hall at Westmoreland House buzzed with excitement as rain lashed against the windows. Agnes, the head housemaid, burst through the door, her cheeks flushed with exertion. "They've found something in the East Wing. Behind the wall they're tearing down for the new library, a woman's diary, hidden all these years." Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper, clicked her tongue. "Never mind that gossip. His Grace expects the silver polished by afternoon." But Margaret Newell, seated quietly at the far end of the table, felt her heart quicken. The diary might be nothing, or it might be her salvation. As companion to the Dowager Duchess of Westmoreland, Margaret's position was precarious at best, her reputation irreparably tarnished after the scandal in Hampshire 2 years prior. At 26, she was neither young enough for marriage prospects nor established enough for security. "Society has decided what you are," her mother had written in her last letter, "and nothing can undo such judgment." Margaret had accepted this as truth. Her family had disowned her, doors had closed, and she had learned to make herself invisible, grateful even for this humble position. Love and respect were luxuries reserved for those without her history. Later that evening, while the Dowager dozed by the fire, Margaret slipped into the East Wing. Workmen's tools lay scattered across dust sheets, the half-demolished wall revealing a small cavity behind the plaster. The foreman had turned the diary over to Mr. Phillips, the butler, but Margaret knew where such curiosities were stored until His Grace determined their importance. The butler's pantry was unlocked, a rare oversight. Her fingers trembled as she located the small leather-bound volume in the desk drawer. She would only borrow it briefly, she told herself, just long enough to satisfy her curiosity. Back in her small chamber, Margaret examined her prize. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowed. Opening to the first entry, dated April 1827, she began to read. "Today I have done what they all said was impossible. I, Miss Lydia Ellsworth, have secured a position as governess to the Duke of Westmoreland's ward. Society believes me ruined, my reputation beyond repair after Edward's betrayal and subsequent denial of our engagement. They whisper I am no better than I ought to be. Let them whisper. I shall make my own way now." Margaret's breath caught. This Lydia had suffered similar judgment to her own. She read on, following the woman's account of arriving at this very house nearly 50 years earlier, tasked with educating the Duke's young ward while managing the disdain of the household. As the clock chimed midnight, Margaret reached entries that made her cheeks burn. "The Duke found me in the library today. He spoke not of books or his ward's education, but asked of my childhood, my dreams before society cast me out. When our hands touched as he passed me a volume of poetry, I felt it like a current of electricity. This is madness. He is a duke. I am a disgraced governess." Margaret turned page after page, witnessing the impossible unfolding. The powerful Duke of Westmoreland falling deeply in love with a woman deemed unworthy by society. Their secret meetings, their shared passion for literature, their growing affection conducted in shadows. A sharp rap at her door startled Margaret from her reading. "Miss Newell, are you still awake?" It was Mrs. Collins. Margaret thrust the diary under her pillow. "Yes, just reading. His Grace has returned unexpectedly from London. The Dowager requests your presence at breakfast tomorrow. The Duke will be joining her." Sleep proved impossible that night. Margaret had never met the current Duke of Westmoreland. He rarely visited his grandmother, preferring London society to the countryside. The household spoke of him in hushed tones. Daniel Westmoreland, the 8th Duke, notorious for his sharp business mind and sharper tongue. Rumors of his ruthlessness in both boardrooms and ballrooms preceded him. At breakfast, Margaret kept her eyes lowered as she sat in her customary place beside the Dowager. When the Duke entered, she rose with the others. "Daniel, you've arrived earlier than expected," the Dowager said. "Railway improvements, grandmother. One can travel from London in half the time now." His voice was deep, cultured. Margaret risked a glance. The Duke was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 35, with dark hair and a stern countenance that suggested he rarely smiled. His eyes, when they briefly met hers, were a startling grey. "Miss Newell, my companion," the dowager said with a dismissive wave. The Duke nodded curtly. "Miss Newell." That single acknowledgement sent a tremor through her. No gentleman of his standing had properly addressed her since the scandal. "I'm told you're making changes to the East Wing," the dowager commented. "A new library. The old one is insufficient for my collection." "They found something in the wall," the dowager continued. Phillips mentioned a book of some sort. Margaret stiffened. The Duke's expression remained impassive. "A diary, apparently. I'll examine it when I have time for such trifles." That afternoon, Margaret returned to her room to find the diary missing from beneath her pillow. Panic seized her. Discovery meant dismissal, and dismissal meant destitution. She was summoned to the Duke's study that evening. Walking the long corridor, she composed excuses, apologies, pleas for mercy. None would suffice, she knew. A woman in her position had no right to privacy, no right to take what wasn't hers, no matter how briefly. The Duke stood by the window when she entered, the diary in his hands. "Miss Newell," he said without turning. "I understand you took an interest in this." "Your Grace, I can explain." "Can you? Because I find myself unable to explain why a woman of your background would risk what little security she has for a dusty old diary." The words struck like physical blows. "My background, Your Grace." Now he turned, his expression unreadable. "Don't play innocent, Miss Newell. I make it my business to know who serves in my household, even those employed by my grandmother. Your dismissal from the Havisham family after accusations of theft. The scandal sheets were most thorough." Margaret lifted her chin despite the shame burning her cheeks. "The accusations were false, Your Grace, though no one believed me. The youngest Havisham's son became improper in his attentions. When I refused him, he claimed I stole his mother's brooch. And naturally, society believed him rather than a penniless companion." "Naturally." The Duke studied her with those penetrating grey eyes. "So you thought to steal again?" "I borrowed it," she said, surprised by her own boldness. "I was going to return it. I felt a kinship with the writer." He glanced down at the diary, then back at Margaret. "You've read it, then?" "Most of it, Your Grace." "Then you know what it contains." His voice had changed, grown quieter. "A love story," she said simply. He moved to his desk, setting the diary down. "Between my grandfather and a governess." Margaret's eyes widened. "Your grandfather?" "The 6th Duke. The author, Lydia Ellsworth, was employed here in 1827. He opened the diary, turning to the final pages. "My father never knew. No one did. Their affair was conducted in absolute secrecy because she was deemed inappropriate, ruined." "But he loved her," Margaret said softly. The Duke's jaw tightened. "Love wasn't enough. He married a suitable woman of his class, my grandmother, while Lydia was sent away. Society's demands were met, propriety preserved." "What happened to her?" "She died in childbirth 2 years later." His voice was flat. "The child was adopted by a country vicar and his wife. The Duke paid for his education anonymously." Margaret gasped as understanding dawned. "Your father?" "My father." He closed the diary with a snap. "The 7th Duke of Westmoreland, who never knew his mother was a disgraced governess, or that the man he called benefactor was actually his father." "How did you discover this?" His lips curved in a smile devoid of humor. "Letters found after my father's death. The old Duke confessed everything to him in writing, but never had the courage to deliver them." Margaret's mind reeled. The proud Duke standing before her carried the blood of a woman society had cast aside. "Why tell me this, Your Grace?" "Perhaps because you took the risk to read her words when no one else cared." He studied her with new intensity. Or perhaps because you understand what it means to be judged and found wanting by those who know nothing of truth. In the days that followed, Margaret found herself in the Duke's unexpected company more frequently. He sought her opinions on books for his new library. He asked about her life before the scandal. Sometimes they simply walked the grounds, their conversations moving from literature to philosophy to their shared experience of society's condemnation. "You should hate them all," she said one afternoon as they walked through the rose garden. "Those who would have despised your grandmother had they known." "Hate requires energy better spent elsewhere," he replied. "Though I confess I've made it my mission to acquire businesses from the very gentlemen who speak most loudly of bloodlines and propriety. There's a certain satisfaction in watching them bow to me, never knowing my mother was a woman they would have scorned." "Is that why you never married?" "Fear they would discover your secret." He stopped walking, his expression suddenly guarded. "I never married because I've seen too clearly how society forces its members to abandon what they truly want for what is deemed appropriate. My grandfather loved Lydia Ellsworth, but chose position over passion. I won't make the same mistake." The dowager noticed their growing acquaintance with obvious disapproval. "Daniel has responsibilities to his title," she told Margaret sharply one morning. "Don't imagine yourself important to him." "I imagine nothing, Your Grace," Margaret replied, though her heart knew otherwise. The diary became their shared secret, their discussions of Lydia and the old Duke a private language. When his hand occasionally brushed hers, when his eyes lingered on her face, Margaret told herself it meant nothing. Men of his station did not fall in love with ruined women. In late autumn, as preparations began for the dowager's annual harvest ball, the Duke received a letter that transformed his usual composure to cold fury. Margaret found him in the library, pacing like a caged animal. "What's happened?" she asked. "Lord Pembroke has published an article questioning my business dealings," he said, thrusting the newspaper toward her. "He hints at unsavory bloodlines that might explain my common approach to commerce." Margaret scanned the article with growing horror. "He knows about your grandmother. He suspects someone has been talking, a former servant perhaps." The Duke ran a hand through his hair. "If this gains traction, every achievement of my life will be attributed to base blood rather than intelligence or effort. I'll become a curiosity, a scandal." "Like me," Margaret said quietly. His expression softened as he looked at her. "Like you, though you wear your unjust reputation with far more grace than I could manage." "What will you do?" "What I must. Assert my dominance publicly, show no weakness." His jaw set in a hard line. "I've invited Pembroke to the harvest ball. I'll confront him here, before society, and make him regret his insinuations." The night of the ball arrived, with an atmosphere of tension underlying the glittering occasion. Margaret, relegated to assisting the dowager, watched from the periphery as the Duke greeted his guests with cold civility. Lord Pembroke arrived late, his smug expression suggesting he expected some form of capitulation. As the evening progressed, the Duke moved through the crowd with predatory grace, eventually cornering Pembroke near the grand staircase. Margaret edged closer, heart pounding. "Pembroke," the Duke's voice carried across the sudden hush. "Your recent literary efforts have caught my attention." Lord Pembroke smiled thinly. "I'm flattered, Westmoreland." "Don't be. I find fiction tedious, particularly when poorly written." Titters ran through the assembled guests. "Not fiction, I think," Pembroke replied. "Merely questions about certain irregularities in your family history. The public has a right to know who controls their commerce, wouldn't you agree?" "The public has no rights regarding my private affairs," the Duke said coldly. "But since you raise the question of heritage—" Margaret moved without thinking, her hand touching his arm. "Your Grace," she murmured, "not like this." His eyes met hers, stormy with anger and something deeper. Lord Pembroke chuckled. Taking counsel from servants now, Westmoreland. How characteristic. The Duke's expression hardened. Miss Newell is my grandmother's companion, and a woman of greater integrity than you could comprehend. Integrity? Pembroke's eyebrows rose. Isn't she the one dismissed from the Havisham household for theft? Really, Westmoreland, your choice of defenders speaks volumes about your own character, or perhaps your bloodline. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Margaret felt the room spin around her as familiar shame flooded back. She had forgotten, in these weeks of the Duke's company, what she was in society's eyes. I did not steal from the Havishams, she said clearly, her voice carrying through the silent room. I refused the youngest son's advances. The accusation was his revenge. A convenient tale, Pembroke sneered. Not convenient at all, came a new voice. A woman stepped forward, Lady Havisham herself, an unexpected guest. My son confessed the truth to me last year on his deathbed. Miss Newell was innocent of all wrongdoing. I've been too proud to make it known publicly. Margaret stared at her former employer in disbelief. As for the Duke's bloodline, Lady Havisham continued, turning to Pembroke, I suggest you consider the consequences of slander against one of England's oldest titles. Whatever you think you know, prudence would dictate silence. Pembroke's face flushed dark red. The Duke's hand found Margaret's, squeezing gently before releasing it. I believe you owe both Miss Newell and myself an apology, he said quietly. Cornered, Pembroke managed a stiff bow. It seems I was misinformed. My apologies. The tension in the room dissolved into renewed conversation, the moment passing into the realm of gossip. But for Margaret, everything had changed. Her reputation, the false belief that had defined her existence for 2 years, had been publicly restored. The Duke found her later on the terrace, where she had escaped for air. You stopped me from revealing my grandfather's secret, he said without preamble. Why? Because it wasn't yours alone to tell, she replied. It was Lydia's story too, and she chose to keep it private. Some truths are not meant for public consumption. He studied her face in the moonlight, even when silence means continuing to be misjudged. Even then, she smiled sadly. Though I confess, hearing Lady Havisham speak the truth after all this time was liberating. You are remarkable, Margaret Newell. He stepped closer. For 2 years you've lived under the weight of others' lies, yet retained your dignity, your compassion. What choice did I have? Many: bitterness, revenge, surrender. Instead, you chose resilience. His hand moved to her cheek. I find myself quite hopelessly in love with that resilience, with you. Margaret's heart stuttered. Your Grace. Daniel, please. Daniel, you cannot mean that. I'm still a woman with a tarnished reputation, employment rather than fortune, no family connections. Do you think I care for any of that? His eyes held hers. My grandfather abandoned the woman he loved because society demanded it. He and Lydia both lived half-lives as a result. I won't repeat that mistake. People will talk, she whispered. People always talk, let them. My reputation was built by my own hands, not inherited with my title. I am powerful enough to withstand gossip. And if I refuse you, will I find myself without position, as Lydia did? His expression softened. You misunderstand me, Margaret. I'm not proposing an arrangement. I'm proposing marriage. The world seemed to stop. Marriage, but the scandal. What scandal? You've been publicly exonerated tonight. And as for my bloodline, he smiled, that remains private knowledge, our knowledge. 3 months later, Margaret Newell became the Duchess of Westmoreland in a ceremony that set London society abuzz. The gossip columns speculated wildly about the rapid courtship, the bride's humble origins, the Duke's unexpected choice. None came close to the truth. On the morning after their wedding, as they sat together in the Westmoreland House library, now completed and filled with books they both loved, Daniel presented her with a wrapped package. A wedding gift, he said. Margaret unwrapped it to find Lydia Ellsworth's diary, rebound in fine Morocco leather. "You're giving this to me?" she asked, touched. "It belongs with someone who understands its value." He took her hand. "Lydia and my grandfather never found their happiness together because they allowed others to define what was possible. We won't make that mistake." Margaret opened the diary to its final entry, written the day Lydia left Westmoreland House forever. "I leave tomorrow, carrying his child and his love, but not his name. Society has decreed our love impossible. Perhaps they are right. But I will tell our child stories of a man who saw beyond my disgrace to the woman beneath. And I will hope that someday the world might change enough to allow love to matter more than position." Margaret closed the diary, her eyes meeting her husband's. "It did change. We are the proof." Daniel drew her into his arms. "No, my love, the world is as judgmental as ever. We simply chose to be braver than those who came before us." In the years that followed, the diary remained their most treasured possession, a reminder that the greatest act of courage is to love despite judgment, and the greatest freedom comes in discarding the false belief society imposes. The forgotten lady's words had found their rightful audience at last, and in doing so had helped two wounded souls claim the happiness that had eluded their predecessors.